Welcome to the Adda, where curious minds gather for deep, intentional conversations that spark new understanding. I'm your host, Deepa Mrichandani, founder of the Deep and Meaningful Consultancy. We believe the biggest challenges of our time demand more than quick takes. They call for nuanced dialogue, deliberate questioning, and a willingness to explore the uncomfortable. Adda is the Hindi word for that space where diverse perspectives collide and transform understanding, hopefully leading to more conscious action. In today's episode, we're speaking with Thomas Legrand. Thomas holds a PhD in ecological economics, and his work combines political and environmental sciences with consciousness, spirituality, and regenerative practices. He currently leads the Conscious Food System Alliance, convened by the United Nations Development Programme, and he is the author of The Politics of Being, an invitation for governments to explore institutional development and design from a place of serving people to be the very best versions of themselves. This conversation stepped into Thomas's invitation to bring science, wisdom, spirituality, and systems change together, to not just imagine an alternative design, but to take practical action in creating it. We covered everything from the paradoxes of these worlds, the challenges of consciousness washing, and what it takes to call for maturity in the way that people see themselves, the roles that they play, and the systems and institutions that they design and perpetuate. We talked about the state of the world and why, in order to really confront the challenges we face, understanding our inner conditions is key. At a time when faith in global institutions is waning, Thomas provides some hope for real action. I encourage you to check out the show notes, where there are links to Thomas's book and his work. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi Thomas, welcome to the Adda. I'm going to get straight into it. And where I'd like to start is that I think we're going to be using the words consciousness and spirituality a lot in this conversation. And I wanted to get us to start by talking through what you see those to be. And what I really liked is that in your book, you decoupled spirituality from religion. And I think that's a really useful place to start, as I think the link can often put people off, particularly if we're going to start talking about institutions and formal, traditional, conservative, stuck organizations.
Yeah, thank you, Deepa. Thanks for your invitation in this podcast. I have my book with me, and I said there, spirituality is a science, art, and practice of inner connection, transformation, and fulfillment. It's psychological science in action. Mm-hmm. So, to me, and as you say, I fully decouple it from religion. And I think many of the problems that we are facing in the West, and with that culture that has now spread, modern culture that has now spread globally, is that modernity has been built against religions in many ways, mm-hmm. And we have, get rid of the baby with the water of the mm-hmm. You say that water of the bath, right? And then we are missing one leg to walk well, and I think we need that reconciliation of science and wisdom, spirituality, because mm-hmm. you're never in a space. I think modernity has ambition somehow to build a public space that is almost value free, but I think it was just not being aware of the value of modernity in themselves. The project of modernity is to reinvent, just use mm-hmm. or reasoned to rethink the traditional ways. But I think we need to become aware that actually modernity has its own way of thinking, which are not neutral, which are not value-free. And if we leave that space of ethics, value, and all the inner awareness of our inner world, share our ways of being, relating, thinking, etc., we are just ended up with the wrong value of, individualism, reductionism, materialism, commercialism, etc. So it's really important, I think, in our society to reinvest that space of value, of meaning. And so getting back to your question about what spirituality means to me, I would say it's that connection to our true self, basically, and how we can bring forward in our life this true, this or true her or true us and high or higher, highest self into the world, right?
But do you think from a Western perspective, that's quite intimidating? Because the separation from religion has been, when you talk about modernity, this kind of secularism is good. And this separation from, particularly in the West, from the church and community, and the substitution of values of consumerism as God type of mentality. One of the things that came up for me as I was thinking of this conversation, and the bit that I kind of struggle with, is this duality of holding the East and the West. And so this cultural breakdown in the West and this kind of spiritual disconnection that's infiltrated how we manage institutions. Because I think, and we'll come to this, because I think in your book, it's like we are the institutions. We make up the institutions, we make up the organizations. And so that kind of versus my own kind of cultural context, which is Indian, where I think, connectivity and collectivism and community centricity, it starts with us sharing food around a table, and then how we show up for each other and how we care for each other and how we relate to each other. It doesn't always have the best of dynamics. It has its own jarring cultural dynamics, but there's reverence for each other. There is reverence for nature. There is this beyond religion. And there's a different kind of journey of separation in the East from all of that. And so when I think of fragmentation in the 21st century and this individualism and this kind of nationalism, it feels like a Western malady. And then I wonder, is that reductionist or is that an accurate kind of assessment?
Thank you, Deepa. Yeah, I think when you're talking about the opposition of West and East, I think you're referring also to that opposition of science and spirituality, wisdom. And I think, yeah, it's important to have that balance and harmony, so all these things are dynamic, the secularism in the 19th century, for example, has now evolved into something that can be very different. And we see that very clearly in France, for example, with all the debate. We have a very strong debate about secularism. At the beginning, it was like, okay, just separating the church from the state and the public space, right? And then it becomes something about being really against all religions. Somehow it's evolving into something else, which I feel is unbalanced, right? So these things, there is a proper balance to find between wisdom, spirituality, and science, because as I said, you can't really have a balanced culture if you're not addressing what are the values you are choosing. Otherwise, these are the values that are being imposed unconsciously, because there is no such thing as a value-free society. And, science cannot tell us actually what the kind of society we want to build, what are the kind of values we want to center. And that's why we get all these values by default of commercialism and economic growth. And, in the same way you were saying, when we bring that aspect of spirituality, consciousness, that kind of wording may close people out in the West. And I would say that is not a very rational attitude. So we can use that, rationality of the West to make space for that. And that's actually what I'm trying to explain right now, right? So, I think there is a path to balance these things in a way that can satisfy also our own rationality. I see that in my work, including with UNDP convened Conscious Food Systems Alliance, when we use that language of consciousness and inner connections, etc., we see that actually it's a lot of our work is just to give permission to people to bring their whole self in the meetings we have in the workplace. And a lot of people are responding positively to that. So it's just a way, or institutions, we can also use that word, are activating certain ways of being and relating, thinking. And a lot of people are welcoming that. No, I think it's a natural process, even if, it can bring also some, how do you say, being vulnerable, right? When you're more authentic. But I think this is something that, a lot of people are welcoming. And it's interesting to see, we were in that distinction between the West and the East, that actually the way when we are bringing these new ways of convening or running workshops, for example, in a way that is much more interactive and connecting, there may be, I see more and more people in our space in the West that are becoming more familiar with that, while people in the East tend to have more traditional and maybe a bit more hierarchical way of running these kinds of events. So it's a whole dynamic process, and there are different parts of it who goes in different direction and can be very complementary between the West and the East. Now, we all have something to bring to that discussion, to put these things in balance.
I think one of the things that strikes me as really interesting that I didn't know about you is this bringing together of the scientific, the economics, the fact that you've studied ecological economics, the social sciences, as well as neuroscience and epigenetics, as well as environmental and the science of environmentalism and consciousness and spirituality together in this kind of magical melting pot of a way of seeing and approaching systems that I think is really, really interesting. And this kind of interconnected polymathic approach, which I kind of wonder, I think gets talked a lot about within the regeneration worlds now, particularly when people are talking about inner development or inner transformation. But it's not backed up with the doing and the action orientatedness. And I think what's interesting, or what struck me as I was reading some of your work, was this combination of combining the being with action and having a little bit of impatience of like that kind of wanting to propel that forward. Have I got that right? I'm kind of curious on your take on my analysis.
No, yes, definitely. So yeah, my book, Politics of Being, Wisdom and Science for a New Development Paradigm, I spent 10 years working on it. It received an international prize and the Nautilus Book Grand Prize and a lot of great endorsement from spiritual, political, and academic leaders. I had a clear intention with this book because, and which matured along these 10 years of working on it. And an important point was that I wanted to offer a proposal that is actionable, because often, these spiritual visions are dismissed in terms of, okay, this is all very nice, but, what do we do about it? No. So that was and in the book, I have 9 sectoral chapters with clear proposals in terms of systems and public policies that are embodying, I think, this new paradigm of being. So the whole idea is about, we organize our societies for being more instead of having more. This is, I think, the true human development. It's not about economic growth, it's more about collective flourishing.
Before we get into the kind of the politics of being, there is something about how do we acknowledge or attend or tend to, I feel feels like the regenerative word, to the systems that are perpetuated around us, and how you don't become consumed by that system. And as we go into talking about the politics of being, those two words coming together feel very, it's obviously really intentional by you, but there's an edge to where those worlds and where those words meet that feels like there's a structural systemic power dynamic between them that I'm just curious about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm a spiritual practitioner, but I'm also a social scientist. So as a social scientist, I know we interact with society and with our institutions. We interact in the sense that these institutions are shaping us, and at the same time, we are shaping ourselves, these institutions. And a lot of people, when they think about this kind of conscious evolution, we could call it issue, are really thinking more in individual terms, in terms, okay, people are doing their own inner transition, and at some point this will change society, right? And I'm looking a little bit, also to be more actionable. Okay, what does that mean then when this society change towards more consciousness, and how we can leverage the power that institutions have on people to intentionally support our collective evolution. So, what are the education systems we need? What are the family policies we need? What are the governance systems, the economic system? All of this is shaping us, and in a way which is rather now are shaping us in a way that not necessarily activate the best in us. It really also nourishes the greed. It nourishes our competitiveness or selfishness. The whole economic system is based on that assumption of a selfish, homo economicus, and is rather enacting it by creating the conditions for this way of being to predominate. So I think in my own experience, we of spiritual practice is a lot about self-awareness or just awareness. So, when you're getting in touch with certain institutions, with certain environment, you can feel certain ways of being or relating, etc., being activated, and you can be aware of that and think about, how it can be on the contrary, how we intentionally design spaces that will activate other ways.
I think there's something really interesting of that stepping back and recognizing that, like, spirituality in its broadest sense, that you take it in, it's not just confronting yourself, but it's also recognizing who you are in relationship with other people and in relation to your surroundings, your connection. But it's a duality. It's not just from a place of taking. It's also how you show up in service of. So there's kind of this relational dynamic and flow as the underpinning of that understanding of yourself.
Yeah, maybe what resonates with me hearing you speaking is that notion of engaged spirituality in the world. So that spirituality is not only about meditating alone, let's say, but it's also developing that awareness of myself and my capacity to respond consciously to whatever shows up in my life. And I think that's it's something that can be very enriching and really an important part of our spiritual life. I think there have been I've been living for the last 11 years now next to the Plum Village Monastery in France from Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, and he has been a key advocate of engage spirituality, and with many spiritual teachers really recommending to not escape the world, but really fully in the world, embodied. And through the interactions we have with people, they reveal part of ourselves that we are not necessarily aware of, and there are opportunity for transformation. So definitely this has been a very important part of my past. I mean, I prioritize my own spiritual journey when I recognize I wanted to center that. So when I did that, when I was 23 years old, after that first very strong connection with native spirituality in Mexico, to me it was naturally a path of service, and that has very much influenced my professional pathway. And and this is something it's a very conscious practice of mine. This kind of call it karma yoga, for example, or engage spirituality, and which I find very, very rich and nourishing.
Yeah, no, it is. I think there's something interesting. So, like with the Thich Nhat Hanh, the quote, I'm paraphrasing the quote that's in your book, but it's if people are not able to save themselves from their own suffering, they can't worry about Mother Nature. So it's that acknowledgement of your own situation, which is really powerful. But I don't know if we can have this conversation about values and consciousness and institutions and politics if we're not thinking about what's going on in the world at the moment and the moral crisis. There is a values crisis in the Western world. And a lot of this is calling for a sense of faith that we can change and engage with the sheer extent of what is going on in the world, let alone then feel that we can have a role to play in that redesign. And I'm going to quote you to you, which is always fun. But you say, our current form of despair is a normal reaction for those that are able to acknowledge and accept the current reality. It is also a necessary step before its transformation. And I think there's something about this acknowledgement, but how do we balance this kind of frustration with the system, the immense needs that there are, the heartbreak, like the really real heartbreak of seeing what we're doing to each other and that fragmentation. And there's something about feeling it, but there's also a certain numbing to it as part of self-preservation in some ways. And the slow pace that deep transformation takes, right? This work takes time. I mean, you've been doing it since you were 23, so you've had a head start with a lot of us for deep practice. And there's so much light touch superficiality. How do you reconcile all of that for the shit show that's going on and the scale of what needs to shift?
Yeah, I would say to me is what is maybe to use a Buddhist term, maybe what is the middle way, but what's I would say what the right balanced path, right? And the right path is to be I would say fully alive as much as we can, right? So really acknowledging the suffering in the world, and by the way, that's I think a very deep truth in Buddhism about, and because I personally, from my own observations, really recognize that the first step in a spiritual journey, I would say, is to be able to acknowledge our suffering. And I think it's a threshold that some of us have crossed somehow, and many have not, because that's very, very, very painful to just acknowledge all the suffering there is inside. But it's a first step to be able to be able to do something about it. No, most of the people just don't want to look inside, right? Yeah, and then what do we do? What do you do then with that suffering? And that is even beyond you, because, a lot of this suffering is just collective. It's not necessarily only individual. And I think it's also a way of balancing the reality of what is, the suffering in the world, and from a very kind of historical perspective, you could say, with the more ultimate dimension about a very rather long-term perspective that, we know there have been several biodiversity extinction phase in the history of the Earth, and it has always come back to flourish, even if it takes millions of years. And yeah, that all of these there is even a cycle to at some point, life on Earth will disappear too. So it's about, I think, really finding that balance with one foot in the historical dimension of what is happening, etc., and one foot in the more ultimate dimension with a longer term perspective, and understanding also nature of spiritual beings that are not, somehow there is a part of us that is not impacted by all that is happening in this external manifestation of the world. So, and it's really, it's a very subtle balance. And yeah, that everyone needs to find his own way of walking that right path.
And talking about that, right, because you've been working in different roles as a consultant and across different sectors, and you've been chipping away with this mission for a long time now. I'm curious about where you found, particularly from these big institutions like the UN or with governments, how are you navigating going into organizations where change or malleability isn't really their style of operating, because they are perpetuators of the system that has been created? So I'm curious what you found inspiring, but also where some of those tensions have been.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think implicitly in your question is about, how do you sustain your hope and energy of doing this kind of work? And I would say for me, it's more about the clarity of my mission, we could say, or what I feel is expected from me at a spiritual level, that I've provided the energy to be where I've been. So it's not something necessarily, fully rational, there. I mean, my mind could have chosen many different paths, but just sometimes I've tried to do other things, and somehow life has shown me also my own direction. So I think it's more from this inner guidance than, outer explanations of my choices, I would say, that I can make sense of my past. So then about how do you bring that change? Yeah, of course, your own way of being, can help people around, and by, reflecting them certain things. But I've been, through this book, I've been also wanting to go beyond that, to offer a path, so it's not just about the way of doing things, but even bringing that conversation to the what, which is as you said at the beginning, not often the case, with these kind of spiritual approaches where, we emphasize very much the how, the ways of working and being, etc. But I wanted to, because I think I'm a very strategic thinker. So as I was dealing, and I've been involved in, let's say, for example, advising some countries in their development strategy and their green development strategy with intersectorial approaches, etc., which has been, I feel I've been guided to be able to develop that kind of vision, which ultimately translated in a spiritual vision, intersectorial, which is the politics of being. So there is this trust that life is guiding me in that process, and maybe where you say the frustration is that even in these very strategic processes, I feel there is not even the space there to actually talk about the root causes. I think we are getting there in terms of with that concept, for example, of the polycrisis. Then you're wondering, what is common to all the different crises in the world, and I think it's becoming more and more obvious that the common root cause is the same mindset or culture. So I think I think we're getting there, and I would say that has been my own search to really trying to address at a deeper level these challenges that we see in the world. And as I didn't see any space where they should have this kind of conversation, that's why I took the time to spend a lot of time in writing this book.
And I like one of the words that you use quite a bit is maturity. And you're calling for maturity and a mature lens, not just in acknowledging the realities, but acknowledging self and also acknowledging place and acknowledging your relationship to it and how you're going to show up for it. So there are a lot of edges. And it's like, I think even like using the word maturity is a deliberate call for like, it's time to grow up and step away from the superficial, because there is a lot of noise in this work that just scratches the surface. And what really struck me is that kind of that digging deeper and digging intentionally and truly to be then able to make sound, strategic, transformative decisions and take meaningful, tangible, practical, get shit done action. But it does call for a maturity, and it calls for holding a mirror up, right? And saying, what's your role? What are you about? Do you dare to dance? It felt like that was part of using. I got all of that from one word, Thomas. I don't know if that was the intention of all of that, but it felt real.
Yeah, let's get back on your remark about what is a kind of language that we can use for people who tend to close themselves to some more spiritual language. So the language of maturity, I think, is a way to make things just more simple and tangible, right? Not making not making such a big deal about all these things. It's just about growing into a mature version of ourselves, and we just have we all have some people like this around us, right?
Yeah, and I think there's something about your comment that tickled me about the SDGs, like I was saying to you. It's like, and you say it lacks the inner strength to become an inspiring force for transformation, which I feel is really, really accurate. It doesn't feel like there's an inner strength. That doesn't feel like it's holding integrity and intentionality, because if it did, it would see the interconnections rather than the silos. And I think it's failed to do that, because then you would see the nuance and you would see the challenges, but you would see the complexity of the system. And I think, and linking that to how you've designed and developed COFSA, You had a 2-year gestation period and design period for Kofsa. So I'm really interested in you talking a little bit about that, because we obviously met when you were first seeding the ideas and bringing people together. And the fact that you're open and saying it's taken a couple of years in ideating and co-creating, I'd be really interested in you talking a bit about that process.
Yeah, so for the Conscious Food Systems Alliance, we call COFSA, which is convened by the United Nations Development Program. Yes, we had a 2-year gestation process because we were really stepping in new territories during COVID times, really where this, thanks to that crisis, there was also opportunities opening up in terms of getting deeper and getting more authentic and recognizing that business as usual is no longer an option. So we were exploring what would be how to bring consciousness as a force for systemic transformation in food systems, right? And we were connecting with a number of people, and we had a co-creation process with some, I think, 25 people, in which we took the time to have, I can't remember, but maybe, quite a number of sessions just for getting to know each other and connection as a way to build, the trust. And from there, probably I would say the depths of the work that we were embarking on. And I think that was very important for the success of the development of this Conscious Food Systems Alliance, which is now thriving with the first global Conscious Food Systems Summit to be co-organized with the government of Bhutan in early September.
And talk to me about UNDP's relationship to COFSA, because when I first heard about it 6 years ago, it was like, I've worked with UNDP in the past, and it was like, this has come left field from UNDP. They were always doing work on food and food systems, so that kind of made sense. But what did it take to start talking to, getting UNDP to take a journey and think about consciousness?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I was talking about the momentum that we are having now with the Conscious Food Systems Alliance. So we had a high level, for example, meeting during UN General Assembly in September, and we had the head of UNDP saying UNDP is committed to walking the path of consciousness. That's really amazing to. So I think because of COVID, at that time, and the disruption that we see in the world, people are really recognizing that they need to, be braver and go deeper in this work. And I feel, we have the space for innovation in UNDP, and I think, but we need to, I think, that takes some courage to open up that conversation and really championing that agenda, saying, no, this is not a woohoo thing. This is something very important, strategic. And I think that courage was initially from Andrew Bovanik, who had first this idea of launching such an initiative and hired me to develop it. And now, in the preparation of this summit in Bhutan, we have most of the key international organizations working on food systems that are part of our advisory committee. So, which is a remarkable outcome in itself, I feel, and just show the level of resonance that we're having, because really people are recognizing that this is very much needed, that we need to question our ways of working, our ways of being, and that we need to, in the same way that we are seeing this cultural backlash and a lot of the progress that were made on some subjects, thinking particular on the environmental crises, are being under attack. They are recognizing that, this calls for much more courage and to really stand for the kind of values that are being attacked. So in some way, there is this, I really believe, there is this process, dialectical process of, the crisis also creating opportunities for growth and for us to be deeper and deeper. And I think the success that we're having is actually due to the circumstance that allow people to have the courage to look inside. In other circumstances, they would not necessarily be so open to what we're putting on the table.
Tell me about the role of the private sector in this story, because the regenerator in me has a much more, we need to go local. It's about localization, and what food systems need is much more localized relationships, season specific relationships to produce. And having worked with large companies, there's a massive supply chain risk. And I think this lack of connection and consciousness in the procurement terms, in the contract terms, in procurement strategies, beyond CSR and sustainability. Can we get the large corporations on board with this? Is that an uphill battle?
So we're just starting to touch on this topic internally in the Conscious Food Systems Alliance. We had a first discussion with our inner council on that. So it's very new, or we are going step by step in terms of some of the discussions we are putting on the table. And we intentionally decided first to look more at local level issues, especially to ground ourselves after that first stage of co-creation, which is quite global and where you tend to have more actually people from the global north involved. So we are starting to have this discussion, in particular in light of the summit. And I think we really acknowledge that, private sector means a lot of different things. So let's say, all the social businesses, B Corps, etc., are, obviously much less risky to engage. What we want to avoid would be a kind of consciousness washing. That is really, and we have been very cautious and feel we can live, without engaging these multinationals, for example. At the same time, we really believe that if we want to transform food systems, obviously that imply also, working with a private sector. And some of us in the team, we have someone, for example, that have been involved in the preparation of the Food Systems Summit, UN Food Systems Summit back in 2021, and which has been very criticized for a potential corporate capture, right? And I think because of this, there would be a tendency that came up in our conversation to rather close up, and which I think we are guided by a kind of spiritual compass, and to me, just closing up doesn't feel completely right. And I think we need first to distinguish between the people and the organizations. So, some person were recommending, well, actually, you can accept as members the individuals, but not necessarily these organizations. And it really led us to a profound, getting deeper into what is our real intention. And in the last retreat we had in England with Satish Kumar, he shared a beautiful testimony about his experience walking India with Biloba. I hope I'm pronouncing it well. So he was a Gandhian leader walking all over India just to ask landowners if they would be willing to share their lands with poor farmers who don't have lands. And to me, we have the video. It's on our YouTube channel. I really advise to look at it. It's really beautiful. And to me, that was a recognition. Okay, that's a kind of purity of intention where there is no judgment, and it's just turn to people, and their potential for goodness that we all have, to try to activate that. So that feels to me the right intention, attitude, inner attitude. At the same time, as I say, in terms of strategy, we all have to be aware about the forces that we are dealing with, and the inherent limitations of organizations who are built for profit seeking, almost as a very strong priority. But when we're dealing with individuals, I think we have to have faith somehow in the capacity of every human being to really open up and to want to do something good for the world. So I think that's a kind of path intention will be following. Obviously, it's when we talk about intention and inner attitude, it's something different than working with very strict guidelines where everything is objectivized. So it's not an easy path, but I think that's what we are called to try to invent. The first step is really to nourish that being dimension, activating certain values before we got into the doing. Deep regeneration is more about principles and ways of being, acting, thinking, relating. And it's essentially, relationship. What is to be in a right relationship between human beings at the end? No? I think that gets to the essence and make it more tangible, right?
And I'm quite interested in this idea of this kind of regeneration washing or consciousness washing that you talked about, because within COFSA as well, you brought in indigenous knowledge and wisdom. And I'm curious about that process and what you've learnt about how we can honor traditional knowledge systems that don't easily translate into institutional frameworks or don't have indigenous washing. Or what are you seeing show up? Because I can imagine there's a little bit of jarring in some of this.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe the first step was to, acknowledging in our values that we wanted to be, science-based, but also aware of other ways of knowing. So there is the same tension we were talking at the beginning between kind of wisdom and science. I think a lot of indigenous wisdoms, gets back to what we're discussing about relationality and our ways of being and relating. I like what you said before about, that kind of tick the box logic. Now we are working on some guidelines. First, we are also defining what we mean by conscious food system. We never done that before. We're just more on how the process of bringing inner development into our work can lead us in the right direction, but we never been explicit about, what actually is that vision. And as we're just starting to work on these guidelines, what we are very clear about is that the worst thing would be to get in the direction of technocratization through a kind of tick the box logic. So, and we are aware that there's a lot of forces and ways of working in the kind of environment we're in, including, the UN space and working with governments and international development, etc., that could lead us in that direction. Or even, even your private sector experience and the labels and certification can really lead us in that direction of certification. I'm personally very clear that we don't want to go in that way, while at the same time we want to offer a bit more guidance to people who want to, develop project in a more conscious manner, or funders that are asking us, okay, so how can I ensure that I'm really funding pathways towards conscious food systems? So we need to address that, but in a way that is true to our values and principle, and which will always be, and I think that's that the bottom line is that it will always be a bit uncomfortable, because it's a way of, it's a path, it's an endless path, right?
Yeah.
And it's more something about balance and growing awareness and being in touch with inherent contradictions that we all have in our environment, including ourselves at COFSA. We're all full of that, but it's just being able to embrace that consciously, without trying to think that there is a definite fix for everything, and even, the best projects, I was recently visiting one of our famous example of regenerative agriculture and even, supply chain, I would say, in conscious in Egypt, SICAM. They have received international prize, etc. And they are very clear that, this is not they don't have all the answers. It's more a path that they are working, and they are not free of challenges and contradictions. But, they are very clear about that. And at the same time, what they have achieved is quite amazing.
Yeah. I think there's something interesting, because I've developed a diagnostic tool for conversation architecture, and one of the challenges of codification is that you need to, like, the number of times I've been saying to people, this isn't a light touch. This is a beginning. This is a mirror that we're holding up for work that then needs to be done. And I think in a world where people want quick fixes, thinking about consciousness and deep intentionality are things that take time, and and deliberately so, and intentionally so, and rightly so. And it's, how does this show up in who you are and who you get to be, to use those words deliberately, and then how that influences and infiltrates into the systems that you're part of and that you are directly influencing. And in a world of quick fixes, we're asking people to be deliberate. And that's a mindset challenge in and of itself. And to me, that's where the crux of a lot of this tension sits. And so it's an interesting paradoxes that you're holding right now.
Yeah, and as you say, this requires certain type of mindset, which I think are, we could say, more in the direction of conscious evolution, where first, we need to be okay with some level of being uncomfortable, which, getting back to my first one about acknowledgement of the suffering inside, most of the people just want to avoid it and shut down. So that means you need to be able to be comfortable with a level of not being comfortable.
Yes.
And it's also being comfortable with complexity. So it's not like they are only right or wrong. It's just much more complex, and there are so many dimensions we are dealing with, and that's also a key aspect of more I would say evolved mindsets. So it's in itself an evolutionary process, and that's a lot. I think that's what prevents us generally to have the kind of conversations that we need to have. I often feel, if you read my book, you probably get to understand that I feel no one is really serious in terms of addressing really meaningfully the challenges that we are facing. We don't have the quality of conversation. We're not talking about the root causes, and because we are, investing our faith in solutions that will not get us very far, because we don't have the courage to just acknowledge the depths of what we are facing. And I think this is a path, and I think the more we are, the depths of the problems becomes undeniable about what we are seeing now happening in the world, the more we will open up to have the kind of conversations and approaches that are needed.
And where are you seeing glimmers of hope with that? Because for me, that being uncomfortable and stepping into it and working with it, to me, is now the foundation of everything I'm showing up with. And I think it's where the heart of that unlocking and sitting with that is where better decisions will come and better action will flow. Where are you seeing the bravery and the courage? Are there particular communities, particular types of people, particular institutions where you feel people are beginning to step into that?
Well, I think, in my daily work with Conscious Food Systems Alliance, I'm, meeting a lot of people that are embracing this, conscious evolution agenda. And as I said, I think actually this is a dialectical process, and I'm very confident that this will grow even more. Even so, you said, you're right also to say there is some, I don't know, can we call that negative feedback loop, where the systems get locked in itself in a process of destruction and shutting up. But no, I do sense there is, a network, a mycelium of organizations that are really embracing this new paradigm, and the fact that we are getting such resonance with the Conscious Food Systems Alliance really gives me hope that what we are building in the food system space could also be built in many different sectors. And I know there are already some initiatives at work, and we are part of a broader movement centering spirituality, inner development, wisdom. I mean, I can use different terms, but I think this is a very powerful trend. The problem is how we can get it the space for it to really influence the outer world and our institutions. And probably, I would say, it's getting probably more traction at the local level, where we have, we talk about these. I mean, small islands of coherence can be also globally online and through these networks. But yeah, I think the local dimension is where it's easier to be able to live in reality these new models, and should be a strong focus going forward. But we also need that kind of more systemic transformation And we are not yet at that point at that threshold of balance, and we are facing very powerful forces that are, preventing us to make that change, right?
And I think there's something about that discernment of stepping away from the superficial and to really see. And I think that's what you call for. I know it's what you call for in the book, but it's also what you're calling for in design. And I think, although you use the word maturity, I think there is we need to grow up. If we really want to do this work, if you really want to be part of, again, these words like transformation gets used a lot. But if we're really going to do it, we have to show up with that vulnerability, but show up with the intention, show up with understanding and being open to look at ourselves so that we can design together, I think is all part of that.
So I think this is a very simple spiritual insight, which is at the root of this new paradigm, is that actually the outer manifestation has a lot to do with the inner conditions that we create in ourselves and in the ways of convening. So I think if we, I would say most of my work is just focused on that. I think if we can just grow that simple awareness and keep our focus on that as societies in the long term, I think this is the heart of the politics of being. Once we would have understood that all we create is shaped by the quality of our being, or if you want to think about more collectively, of our collective mindsets or culture, and that's where we should be intentional and invest our efforts and focus on awareness. It's just one simple insight. And I think that when societies understand that, they will have understood the key to evolution. There have been a lot of requests to people finding there is a lot of depths in this book, a lot of things to unpack and discuss. So that's why we just started a book club, which will be monthly sessions. We have the first in January of introduction, and we'll go throughout the book together until August. And I think the second session is maybe the first or second week of February. So that's the last possibility for people to join this group. And very much forward to, we have a beautiful group, and I'm really sure that we'll have a beautiful journey together in these very special times.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I think in a nice reminder when it does look quite bleak politically, reframing in action and also self and what you're really about has been very inspiring for me. So thank you so much. I'm really glad we got to do this.
Thank you so much, Deepa. Me too. It was great discussing with you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If this conversation sparked something in you, don't let it end here. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it, or better yet, gather your people and dive deeper into these ideas together. The world changes one meaningful conversation at a time. If you'd like to join one of our group order sessions, keep an eye on our website, which is www.deepameaningful.co, or sign up to our monthly newsletter and be the first to know what's coming up. The Udder is brought to you by the Deep and Meaningful Consultancy. Our music is from the song Unreasonable World by Bernard Schimpelsberger.